These are the neighbors. No kids, no kids, no kids, no kids, kids, no kids, adult kid that should have been aborted. Yeah, pretty much no kids.
I had fallen deep down a rabbit hole, researching the philosophy of antinatalism, the belief that having children is morally wrong.
When you bring somebody into the world, you are gambling with their life.
You're putting all that risk on them of cancer, dementia, all the horrible things we see.
That's actually wrong.
You have a big grin on your face.
Well, I mean, it's just so fundamentally true, and I think a lot of people don't understand that.
There's no reason for you to reproduce.
I'm not convinced by it.
I'm not convinced by it, no, and I don't think any sort of convincing is ever going to undo the biological imperative to have children.
And yet, this fringe belief continues to attract new followers.
A 27-year-old man in India is suing his parents for giving birth to him without his consent.
Bit of a revelation, really, to actually find that there are people that think along the same lines.
Taken to its logical conclusion, the implications of antinatalism are hard to stomach.
The name voluntary human extinction pretty much sums it up.
Extinction is a word he uses.
So I want everyone to die, otherwise you just carry on and on and on and on forever.
And I'm like, well, buddy, you can start with yourself.
I've set out to understand what draws people to antinatalism.
The end of suffering forever, that's a really tough thing to say no to.
What kind of toll does it take on their lives?
I think a lot of people would assume that antinatalists would resent their parents.
Yeah, they wronged me by bringing me here.
And how does it relate to wider issues?
Full reproductive freedom doesn't exist anywhere.
Is antinatalism simply a crisis of mental health?
Suicide is very brave.
I'm so happy that my friends are free.
Or do they have a point?
Existence is the problem. The solution is never existence.
Do you wish I hadn't been born?
Most people underestimate the amount of bad in their lives.
I think it would have been better for the world and for you not to have been born.
There is no purpose. You're just trapped in a prison. Not my words. They belong to the Antinatalist Reddit group, which boasts over 200,000 members. Scrolling through it is enough to drive you to drink. The only question is if the glass is half full or half empty. No prizes for guessing which an antinatalist would choose.
Think about all of your poor unborn children who have no problems right now, but if you create them, they're going to have a whole lot of problems just created just by that one moment of, a nice feeling and a rub-a-dub-dub.
I was outside King's Cross Station in London, watching Danny Shine interact with the public.
This is what I'm saying, we're all deluded, and people like that are having children, can you imagine? Which is why I always carry some spare condoms to anybody who has half a chance this evening of making some poor woman pregnant.
And on one of his breaks, I found myself on the receiving end of a diatribe.
There's no reason to do it. Think about why you do want to. Why? Why do you want to? What? You want to be like the master of somebody else's life? You want to tell them what to do? You want to guide them? You want them to look up to you? Do you want that? Well, fuck for. You got your own little fucking life to take care of, and all your own bullshit and demons and all this shit that we've all got, yeah? So why would you do that? Why would you even want to? You can parrot any old stupid shitty line, but if your child is asking you why did you have me when they're in crisis, you need to tell them the truth. Why would you?
I was struggling to figure out how much of this Danny really believes and how much is a provocative form of street theatre. So I arranged to meet up with Lawrence Anton, an antinatalist whose actions speak louder than words.
Can we talk about your scrotum?
Yeah. I don't get asked that by a man every
Tuesday evening.
You have had a vasectomy.
Yeah.
How old were you when you had it?
23, I think. The way I saw it was that if I did change my mind after having a vasectomy, I've only screwed over myself. But if I don't get a vasectomy and an accident happens, I've screwed over someone else in terms of like creating them. And also, if I did have a vasectomy and lived to regret it, and I wanted to have a child, I could adopt, right? And that's not a bad thing.
I suppose what I'm curious is when you're going through a really euphoric moment in your life, something really joyous, do you ever doubt your convictions?
Well, in the most euphoric times, I'm probably not thinking about antinatalism because I'm like so in the moment with whatever's going on. But if someone was to like drag me out of it for a split second and say, think about the moment you're in now, it's amazing to have those euphoric moments, but if I was never born, I wouldn't exist to be deprived of them.
We walked up Primrose Hill to gaze out over the city beneath us. And I couldn't help but ask if Lawrence was really okay with all those millions of people eventually disappearing if antinatalists were to get their way.
I do understand the sentimentality of why people find that sad, but once it's happened, there will be no one around to be sad about it, you know? And I don't think sentimentality is a good enough reason to impose suffering and death on millions and millions of people in new generations.
It seemed as though every answer begged another question, which was how I found myself traveling across the pond for 2 weeks of intense filming with antinatalists in the US. First up was Chicago, home to Amanda Sukenick, an artist, podcaster, and antinatalist archivist who's a prominent figure in the community. I arranged to meet Amanda at the apartment she'd grown up in.
Hello.
Hey, Amanda, hi. How you doing?
Not too bad. How are you? Welcome.
Thank you.
Hey, Bruno. You know, I had inklings of something like antinatalism in very early childhood. Like I can kind of show one example here. So one of my childhood heroes was the Phantom of the Opera, you know, and there's a lot of birth lamentation, and you know the first line in this children's adaptation is, "I curse the day I was born." And I'm like, there might be something to that. I'll put that on the back burner and think about that later. Sorry, you were going to ask something.
No, I was just going to say, I mean, do you curse the day you were born?
I mean, it's a kind of a yes or no answer. You know, I curse the fact that risks were taken with my sentient welfare. I curse the fact that I'm going to die one day, and that I have no guarantee that that's going to be some sort of, you know, wistful, calm, peaceful transition from being alive to not being alive. There's a lot of regrets that I have about choices that were made against my, without consulting me. It was impossible to consult me, but I regret that I could not be consulted. That's not to say that there aren't a lot of things in my life that I love. I mean, I think this room sort of is a chapel to the things in my life that I love, you know. I think I'm more scaling towards, I do wish that I had never been born. I think that procreation is an egregious act of violence, basically. And so I definitely do. Yeah. Sorry. Blah, 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 blah.
No.
But,
because some people might say making a choice for someone else to bring them into the world, but you're also giving them all of these benefits and nice things.
Yeah.
How do you hold that view against antinatalism?
The idea that there's all this control over the kind of life that you can, there's no guarantees. There's absolutely no guarantee that you're going to be able to provide the beings that you create with any of these joys or any of these satisfactions. But what you can guarantee is that you're creating a being that will die, and that will inevitably experience suffering. You want to sit on the couch?
Sure, yeah.
Okay.
What drew me to antinatalism as a subject matter wasn't so much the philosophy as understanding how it plays out in the lives of those who follow it. So I put a question to Amanda which had been on my mind most of the morning.
It's so unpalatable to a lot of people.
Yeah.
Does it affect relationships or dynamics with people?
So I think that this gets into something where, this is one of the reasons why antinatalist activism has such a difficult time. Because to espouse these views, to put these kinds of views forward as a part of your identity has a cost to it. It has a social cost to it. There's no question about that. And I think that I am in a unique situation where, like, I'm somebody who's not had to pay social costs for being the way that I am. And I know people will hear that and think I'm trying to tell some sort of sob story. It's fine. I have no problem with it. But, like, I've always been genderqueer. I've always been overweight. I've always been, an unusual individual for somebody born female. And so I'm used to sort of paying those kinds of social costs. Like, in some ways, I'm sort of an ideal person to espouse these views, because the idea that it's going to cost me more of that kind of means nothing to me. It means a lot to a lot of other people, though. And I think that that's primarily the reason why so much antinatalism is behind closed doors, which is another reason why I think it's so important that those that do feel comfortable about it do it. Have more of a responsibility to do it. So yeah, I'm proud. I'm proud and pleased to be somebody that can, and I feel like I have a responsibility to.
Antinatalism is a philosophy which has grown slowly and steadily as it spread through the corners of the internet. Until 2019, when it exploded briefly into the mainstream.
A 27-year-old man in India is suing his parents for giving birth to him without his consent.
The lawsuit didn't go ahead, but the flurry of news stories around it exposed many more people to the belief. Overnight, the Reddit group was flooded with new members, and with that influx came misconceptions. I wanted to meet one of the people policing the discourse online, so I traveled down to San Antonio, Texas to meet an administrator of the largest antinatalist Facebook group, Kirk Woller.
I do it usually right here.
Oh, really? Okay.
Let me go. Hun, would you bring that computer in for me?
I sat down with Kirk to talk about how he views his role in the community.
They needed to clean it up, step it up. And that's really what I was brought on for, because they were just having trouble keeping all the conversations from deteriorating.
So what kind of stuff were you looking at when you took it on?
Well, I think people conflate antinatalism with baby hate or violence and those things. And it's basically the opposite of all that.
What is the most troubling kind of thing you've had to take down?
Well, violence, people that don't understand the voluntary nature of it. So in other words, we should impose sterilization, or certain people deserve to reproduce is another problem. It's not a eugenics program. It's existence is the problem. The solution is never existence. And I've had this state of mind since I was 4 years old. So 60 years.
That seems very young. I mean,
there's a word for that. I don't remember what it is.
When I was 4, I don't think I could even.
My mother was pregnant with number 3. And so then it seemed more obvious. And she didn't try and hide the fact. So then I thought, well, all this misery comes, but I just thought no one had a choice. I thought we were the unlucky winners of life, and everyone here was going to cooperate and try and do the best they could to get through it. And then when I asked her, does this just happen to you? Do you just get pregnant? And she said, no, it's a decision your father and I made. And that was it. That's all I needed to know, is like, you chose to put me at risk without my consent, and now I have to go through life and deal with all the stress and stress. And I had no needs or desires prior to my existence, so this is strictly because you wanted something.
Did you have a happy childhood when you were 4 years old?
I think my parents tried to do what they could. I would say we were lower middle class. I did spend a lot of time on my grandfather's farm. Physical punishment was real. And even to the point, if you ever think of further back, that was the edge that I caught, was you had to go like pick your own switch. So there you've got a psychological dilemma, because you've got to go grab one that's big enough to satisfy your father.
This is to hit you.
Right, for punishment. If you got one too small, well, then he would pick one. So he said, I need to pick one that's as small as I can get away with. So even there is sort of a psychological trauma. I mean, you're choosing your own punishment. It's like, do you want to be hung or shot? Right?
I suppose what I'm getting at is if you had a different childhood, whether you would have thought at 4 years old, maybe I haven't been burdened with consciousness.
No, because it wasn't just me. It was the whole concept of putting someone at risk for, not on their part, but for your own reason, and with no remedy. And that's how I see it. This is a rifle. You can hold it very well.
That's the rifle.
As well as being the sheriff of Facebook, Kirk is a keen shooter.
This is a leather. You can put it on the table in the middle room there.
Okay.
Over that way. This is my home defense gun.
That's your home defense gun.
And, there you are, right?
He offered to take me shooting and even changed into his authentic Western outfit.
I feel kind of underdressed now.
And the next thing I knew, I was loading up my rented pickup with guns.
I hope you don't mind me bringing it up, but when we spoke on Zoom before, you said that your parents really didn't understand your beliefs, and it had caused some distance between you.
Yes, of course. I mean, parents don't want to be wrong, and they don't want to feel like they're not appreciated for bringing you into this place. But they're fairly well entrenched, and I don't really try and change their mind. I mean, that's somewhat pointless.
Do you see them very often?
No, it's been 15 years maybe.
So if your parents acknowledged that what they did was wrong, bringing you into the world, do you think that might bring you closer to them again?
That would be a big help to better conversation, of course. But if someone insists that what they did was right and they wouldn't change it, to me, forgiveness requires repentance of the action that's causing harm. That's just a fundamental definition to me. Otherwise, it doesn't really have any meaning. It's just a mental assent that they're going to mistreat you. And you've accepted that mistreatment. I don't really see how that's healthy at all. Pull the trigger gently and lower it. Gently
There's
lower
a live round in there, right?
Gently lower it.
Okay, but there is a live round in
Yes,
there?
lower it gently.
Okay.
Gently lower it.
There's something oddly sexual about cleaning the gun like this.
Is there? For you?
I mean, they're pretty phallic things to begin with in their own way.
guess.
So.
I just never think of it like that.
As we sat at the dining room table cleaning the guns, the conversation turned to depression.
I think depression is usually a result of a mismatch between your expectations and the reality of your situation. And that difference there is the depression. And I've experienced it, and a lot of people do. And I think maybe antinatalists are keen on that because they're compassionate, usually, or they wouldn't be driven to the understanding. And they're rational. And they see that the world really is not the way it could be, should be, or ever will be. So you live in a dysfunctional environment. And when you live in a dysfunctional environment, you put an animal in a cage, it's not the place it needs to be or should be, and you're stuck in a wage slave job. You have to sit in traffic. You're in a place that doesn't consider you anything more than just a cog. That's depressing as well, right? And when you realize that you needn't have gone through that, I think that can be depressing. So I think compassion is required. I think if you're not a compassionate person, I don't think antinatalism will make sense to you.
Have you ever felt suicidal?
I've seen there's times when I've felt like I really, really would have difficulty carrying on, yeah. I would say yes, probably so. But I think that's not uncommon for just the general population. I think people should have the right to take their lives. I've had people in my family do that. Not immediate family, but close. And whether it was chronic pain that couldn't be relieved or just a really difficult situation. You didn't ask for this life, but you should be able to at least leave. But the problem is it doesn't always work. You might end up in a worse situation than you're in. You have to consider the people around you. How does it affect them? Once you're alive, once you exist, then you have all these other considerations. And the key thing about antinatalism, which I want to make so clear, is it's prevention. It prevents all these moral issues. It's that simple. Once you have that, whether it's abortion or sending grandma off on a raft in the icy sea, those are all difficult decisions to make. You don't have to make any of those if you're just not here. So the prevention is the key. You can live the life you want, as long as you want, how you want. But just stop. Stop making it more. That's it. It's really just that simple. People make it so complicated, and they also don't want to bring their minds to it. That's what I don't understand.
Mom, I'm at the bus station in Hollywood, and this gentleman says he can make me a star, and if you could just wire me $250. Hello? Mom? Mom. Hi, welcome.
I was in Arizona. I had traveled 800 miles west from San Antonio to a small town of 5,000 people called Bisbee, near the Mexican border, to meet the comedian Doug Stanhope and his wife, the writer Amy Bingo Bingaman.
Who are these?
That's us.
That's you?
Oh, yeah.
He gets me a wig, he takes the Bible, and we go for it. We sprayed his face to look oily.
I wanted to chat with Doug because of a rich vein of antinatalism running through his material.
The best thing I've done with my life is the abortion that I had. Quitting school and having an abortion are the two things I look back and go, oh, you're fucking good work, Stanhope. And I say it's my abortion, but it was my wife at the time. She had the abortion and I paid for it. It's not the kind of thing you try to go Dutch on.
Yeah.
No.
And there was no part of either of you that wanted to keep it?
No, that was the only thing we never fought over. Before and after we broke up, we fought about pretty much everything, but that we could always cheers.
Why?
Because we'd have to be fucking dealing with a kid right now, still. I mean, yeah, that kid would be, probably if he was in college, I'd have to pay for that. If he was a drug addict, I'd feel responsible. Whatever he did, it's my fault. And I've always thought that about my parents. How does anyone have the hubris to just have a child? I don't understand the 18-year-old cutoff. But no, you created me without my consent. You should technically be responsible for me forever. And plan ahead for if you were to die, well, what am I going to do? Work?
Doug and Bingo had an unusual start to their relationship. They met shortly after she'd been released from a psychiatric hospital, which informed her decision not to have kids.
Well, I knew early, but when I got diagnosed for the first time, it was like, that's actually wrong for me to bring a child into this world. I can't guarantee all the time that I can take care of myself. I can't guarantee that I won't be locked up in an institution again or several times. So that's just not fair or right.
What was that initial diagnosis that you got that first time?
Schizoaffective bipolar.
Okay. And do you think meeting Doug helped? That wasn't meant to be a dig at you. I just meant in the sense of...
No, it's just a really clumsy phrasing in a very comedy beneficial way.
Yeah. Truth be told, 1,000,000% yes. Yes. I don't know what that is.
Yeah, get on that
here's
side. Get on that
kids.
side. Get on Henry's side. And you know why we had those dogs? Because those dogs' parents fucked without their permission, like animals. That's what animals do. They just breed more animals, and that's what you do. Bury your animals, and then just
leave a clean slate.
We were taking a break for a tour, and I asked if Doug would mind talking about his mother's experience at the end of her life. Although antinatalism is unlikely to catch on, it crosses over with other more widely discussed topics, including the right to die.
Right there, right where your cameraman is standing. Your cameraman is standing on my mother's grave. How dare you, right about here. And Bingo was laying right here on a couch. Do you know this story?
My mother was, she was 63 at that point, and she was just medically just a problem. She had stents in her heart, she had COPD, she was barely breathed, she was hospice care, a million other, crushed discs, bad back, just a million issues. But there was the COPD that was killing her, and she'd always made it a point throughout our lives to let us know she would never be the person that's going to die with a lot of tubes coming in and out of her. She would point out morbidly obese people in the supermarket. Orthopedic was the code word. She goes, there's an orthopedic, line 4. And she goes, if I ever get that bad, kill me. And she did get that bad, so we did.
Even though it wasn't legal, Doug sought out a doctor who could outline what his mother needed to end her life. He had to wait until the statute of limitations had passed before he could talk about it.
I need some black market advice on she wants to kill herself. She has hospice care, and that's what the doctor said. If she get hospice, then she should have morphine. Ma, do you have morphine? Yes. And he spelled out the amount that she needed to kill, or any human being would need to die. And yes, right in that room right there. I bar-backed while she slowly took pills and watched Bad Santa and tried to make a party of it.
It was becoming clear that antinatalism intersects with issues many of us will have to confront sooner or later. We may have been brought into the world without a choice, but perhaps we should have the right to leave on our own terms. This wasn't the only wider issue, though. It also crosses over with environmentalism and reproductive rights, two issues which are very important to Les Knight, a key figure in the voluntary human extinction movement. Although Les has been campaigning for decades, he'd recently been the focus of a New York Times article, which drew the attention of Elon Musk.
And he was quoted on the front page of the New York Times as saying, there are 8 billion people in the world, but it would be better if there were none. And I'm like, well, buddy, you can start with yourself.
I traveled north from the desert to Portland, Oregon to meet with Les.
Hello. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Les was gracious enough to let us stay in his home.
Would you like to see your accommodation?
I would absolutely love to.
I was a little nervous sleeping in the home of a man who wants us to go extinct.
It's actually pretty comfortable. I've slept on it.
Yeah.
But having survived the night, we sat down in the garden the next morning. Les began by discussing the importance of reproductive rights.
It's like, do you think that every couple who doesn't want to procreate should have the wherewithal to not procreate? I'm going, well, duh, of course. Saying, well, they don't. Hundreds of millions do not have the wherewithal to not procreate. In fact, full reproductive freedom doesn't exist anywhere. Right now, there are 121 million unintended conceptions per year. But if 30 years ago, 50 years ago, all women on the planet had the reproductive freedom, had full choice of whether or not they procreated, I don't think we would be overpopulated to the extent that we are today.
For Les, the issue of reproductive rights is inseparable from the broader issue of climate change and our warming planet.
In fact, that's one of the main reasons that we need to have universal reproductive freedom. Everybody not born everywhere, but especially in those areas that are going to be hit the hardest, will die. They won't have to experience those horrible conditions and die in it. And also, the people who are already in existence will have a better chance of surviving if there aren't more of them. Like if a couple has 2 offspring to care for and migrate with, that'd be a lot easier than having 6.
It's such a difficult idea for people to get on board with. And you recently drew the ire of Elon Musk, is that right?
Yeah. He said if you start thinking that humans are bad, it's natural to conclude that we should die out. Yes, you got it. It's not that we're bad for the biosphere. We don't mean to be bad most of the time. We're just incompatible with other life on the planet.
Do you think that you need to be an environmentalist to...
I don't know if I got him.
What was that?
Mosquito.
Oh.
About to actually...
Maybe Les is right. We are incompatible with other life on the planet.
I hope we got that on camera.
I had traveled down to Canyon City, Colorado, where a Halloween decoration was making me question my mortality. And from there, things would only get more morbid. I'd been introduced to a filmmaker and illustrator who created a coloring book called The ABCs of Antinatalism. He goes by the name Life Sucks on YouTube, and I wanted to understand how he was deploying creativity to spread the message. His real name is Matt.
Hey Matt, nice to meet you. Nice to meet you too, Jeff. How you doing?
Good. For someone who goes by the name Life Sucks, I was somewhat surprised by the choice of poster in Matt's office.
Mr. Rogers.
Yeah, he's a hero of mine. So I have a couple posters of him around the house. Yeah, I should have it on the wall, but...
Did you watch the Tom Hanks?
Oh yeah, that's a great movie.
Yeah, that was a great movie.
We sat down to look at Matt's book. Given some of the ideas in it, I wasn't sure exactly who it was intended for.
I mean, a coloring in book, is this tongue-in-cheek, or is it really, have you given this to any kids to actually look at?
No, it's not.
It's quite dark.
It's not really meant for kids 3 to 5 or anything like that, but I would say teenage kids could definitely get some use out of it.
Which one stands out to you? Which are you proudest of?
You know, I really like the E for Ephilism because that was fun to draw because it's got a Tyrannosaurus Rex and a great white shark, and I wanted to feature that side of the philosophy. It doesn't get featured in published works very much, if at all.
Right. Mm-hmm. Do you want to read that
Sure.
for us, actually? Yeah,
absolutely. Ephilism, which is life spelled backwards, Ephil, is an antinatalist ethical framework devised by the American philosopher Mendham. And basically, the difference between this and mainstream antinatalism is that it's anti-life, anti-all life, anti-animal life. Plant life is not sentient, so that doesn't matter as much. But whereas antinatalism is, a lot of people just consider it anti-birth, anti-human birth philosophy, and that's why he wanted to separate the philosophy from mainstream antinatalism.
Yeah. Well, I mean, speaking of anti-all life, I mean, how do you square that with having this adorable dog sitting here with you?
Well, he's adopted, so I had nothing to do with him coming into existence. He was living on the streets, getting scraps, wherever he could, trying to survive like we all are. And I took him into my home just to let him live out his life comfortably. Yeah, so we should give comfort to animals that are already here. And he's sterilized, so he can never reproduce.
Mm-hmm. I wanted to pick you up on a phrase.
Given Matt's artistic talent, we sat outside whilst he sketched a portrait of me in his unique style.
So you're now living in this idyllic part of Colorado, but you were in Michigan for a long time. Why did you make the move down here?
Big part of it was because my parents died and my brother. So there's a lot of memories back in Michigan, and I just wanted to just start over. Yeah. And then my partner at the time wanted to move as well.
What did your parents think about your beliefs before you lost them?
They didn't understand them, especially the vegan thing, but my dad did say on his deathbed that he understood. He said, I get it now, it's inhumane. And it's just interesting how when people are finally have nothing to lose at all, they can come to the truth.
But did you have a good relationship with them?
I did, yeah. I loved my parents. I was really close to them, and I'm really lucky that I had such stable people, you know, and anyone who knew them misses them.
Because I think a lot of people would assume that antinatalists would resent their parents in some way, but it doesn't sound like you do.
Oh, I do. I didn't deserve to be in this shitty-ass world, and yeah, they wronged me by bringing me here, and then they left me. They abandoned me. That's something that a lot of parents don't seem to think about, is they're just going to abandon their kids. They're going to leave them, and they think, oh, I'm going to give them the skills to survive, but you never really get over the death of your parents, I don't think, so.
If it's not too personal to ask, you said that your partner you moved down here with, you're not with them anymore?
We're separated.
You're separated.
Mm-hmm.
And do you think that your beliefs played a part in why you're no longer together?
I think so. Well, she said it was hard to live with a pessimist. Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, it probably did. Mm-hmm. There you are.
Wow. I'm not sure if that's one for Tinder, but that's darker than I thought it was going to be.
Yeah, so that's kind of a play off of the cover of my coloring book, where
with the skeleton inside the stomach.
Yeah, so because whenever you have life, you have death.
Whenever you have life, you have death. Most antinatalists are keen to emphasize that the philosophy is about preventing new lives, not ending existing ones. And yet, they can be difficult subjects to separate.
Life is hard. It is. You know, it's really hard to get it right. It's really hard to be it's not easy to be a human being.
I was back in Chicago to catch up with Amanda. And as we were setting up, we found ourselves discussing depression.
You mentioned a minute ago that you'd lost a number of friends to suicide. Yeah. Do you mind expanding on that?
No. I mean, it's just unfortunately a big piece of kind of what this thing is, especially since the questions that antinatalism poses genuinely just leads to more questions about staying here. And I just think that that's a fact, and it's kind of an uncomfortable fact for a lot of antinatalists. But that is one of the reasons why I think there is such a big overlap between antinatalism, the right to die, pro-mortalism, and I have a lot of friends who have decided that they don't want to be here. There was a period of time I was basically losing one friend sort of every month.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Yeah, it's. I think it really is the toughest part of being in this community. Is, you know, I love these people, and it's so these are such rare specimens of humanity, and they're so good. You know what I mean? And they're so talented, and they're so brilliant. And as somebody that believes in the right to die, I do, like, I'm so happy that my friends are free, that they're no longer suffering, you know? They might not have got to live their lives the way that they would have preferred, which is to not exist at all, in the case of most of my friends, but they did get to live their deaths the way that they chose. And so I can't in any way regret their decision, but it is difficult not to have that piece of you that just is selfish, because now you're alone, you know, now those people don't exist, and now your friends are gone, and it's a difficult thing to contend with, for sure.
I was on my way home, having spent 2 weeks in the company of antinatalists. And for all the nuances in those I'd spoken to, there was still one more side to all of this I hadn't explored. I was at Speaker's Corner in Hyde Park. I was there to film with Danny, who I'd observed at the very start outside King's Cross.
There's no reason for you to reproduce. There isn't, and there's no reason for you either. What?
I wanted to talk with Danny because he represents an uncommon perspective within the antinatalist community.
Yes, so
You've
what?
got kids!
So what?
You've got kids and you're saying that!
How does your daughter feel about your anti-procreation?
What's that got to do with anything?
Danny is one of a handful of parents who discovered antinatalism after having children.
How does she know how she's going to be as a mum? She ain't got no idea. Until you're a mum, my dear, you haven't got a fucking clue. Is that your mum?
I wondered whether Danny's abrasive approach was doing more harm than good for his message.
Hi.
Hello. Hey, Danny. How you doing?
But his gentler side emerged when I arranged to meet him one-on-one at his home. His family didn't want to take part.
You are unique to the people I've spoken to so far in that you do have kids. You have 3 kids, is that right? Can I ask how old they are?
Sure, 26, 24 and 17.
So what did having children mean to you before you discovered antinatalism?
So I'm just going to think about that for a moment. I mean, I didn't really think about it much. It was just something that I was brought up as something that I would do, just like having a job, getting married. So it was just something that I did. I did not think about what meaning it had or not.
One of the more common questions Danny gets is if he wishes he hadn't had children. But as you'd imagine, the answer isn't quite as simple as that.
You know, I regularly count my blessings, sometimes in writing. You know, I have a list of the things that I appreciate. And I think it's far more useful and productive to do that than to start wishing that things in my life were different in the past that I can't change. So I just don't think like that. But I think it would have been better had I never been born, and it would have been better had they never have been born. For many reasons, because if they'd never have been born, then they wouldn't have any problems. And if I'd never have been born, I wouldn't have any problems, and I wouldn't have caused anybody else any problems, which I have done over the years.
Do you ever worry that being so vocal about your beliefs in some ways is going to create this self-fulfilling prophecy where your kids are going to start looking for grievances or finding reasons to suffer in their own lives because they've heard you banging on about it so much?
Listen, I can't change who I am fundamentally, right? Personally, I don't want them to sit there in terrible depression and suffering. Of course I don't. And I try and do what I can to make sure they don't do that and make their lives enjoyable and make their lives, try and reduce any suffering that they do experience. And at the same time, I don't want them to be, I don't want them to be like living in cloud cuckoo land, because that could lead to them creating more problems, creating more people, creating more problems.
What do your kids think about it on the whole?
My oldest child is a daughter, she's 26, and then there's 2 boys. The boys are more into the idea, I think, but I think for her it's much harder because all her friends are, getting married and having children, and, so for her I think it's harder. We don't really talk about it very much anymore.
I mean, do you think that your daughter is going to have children at some point?
Who knows? I mean, it's definitely not out of the realms of possibility. Yeah, she definitely, she hasn't said that that's not going to be the case. She's not an antinatalist herself. Yeah.
So what would you do if your daughter brings home a baby from the hospital one day and you're a grandpa?
I mean, I don't know how I'll feel. It's difficult to know. But, when I look at it now, I'd be devastated by it, really devastated. I'd be devastated what she'd done to the child, and I'd be devastated about what it'd do to her, because, I really do firmly think that makes perfect sense to me that if you want to take care of a child, we need to take care of our own little children that are inside ourselves that haven't been taken care of properly and have been traumatized by just by life itself, or by all sorts of horrible things that happen to people in life. So, you know, I don't think any of my children are in a position to take care of other children. They need to take care of themselves and their own journey. So if she did that, yeah, I would be really, really upset. I don't know what I would do, but my initial feeling would be I don't really want to have anything to do with it. I don't have anything to do with it.
I had reached the end of my time immersing myself in the world of antinatalism. It's tempting to categorize the belief as a symptom of depression or trauma, and yet that also feels reductive. On the one hand, it's a cynical belief marked by defeatism.
What antinatalism is about is trying to wake people up from what's basically propaganda we've been fed for our whole lives, that life is good.
And on the other, a case of compassion and empathy for the unborn, pushed to its very limits.
I don't want to wake the dead. Having children is like waking the dead, okay? And so I can only get myself to live a better day each day, not to force somebody else to go through the same cycle of failures and successes for absolutely no reason. Like, putting that on somebody else is just, I can't think of anything more cruel.
Whilst it can be an isolating ideology with heavy costs to personal relationships, the duty to spread the word also creates a paradoxical sense of purpose for many antinatalists. They may be shouting into the wind, but in doing so have forged bonds and fostered a community online, in their pursuit of a world free of suffering and free of people.